Good evening, and thank you for joining us to usher in International Women's Day. I'm Kler, the curator of 7 Acts of a Woman's Life. It's an event that I put together to be able to celebrate the many acts that we women juggle in the theater of our life. We're on day 2, actually. Day 1 went off fabulously yesterday. We had conversations on balancing work and home life, on womanhood, on well-being. And I'm so excited about the upcoming conversations of day 2. But before we start, I'd like to thank our partners. QuintFit being our media partner. Thank you so much for hosting us. I'd like to thank Mana Wellness for being our well-being partner, Dr. KK Agarwal's HCFI for being our NGO partner, and the Healthy Indian Project for being our healthcare partner. So today's first conversation is about how we can own our trauma and our pleasure in relationships. Because if we don't own our stories, there's no way in hell that we can have healthy relationships. So joining me on this panel are 3 amazing people. I'm so happy that I was able to get them together. We have with us Neha Bhatt, who is a licensed art-focused sex and trauma therapist and a writer, known as the Indian sex therapist on social media, famously known as the Indian sex therapist. Thank you for joining, Neha. We have with us Teya. Teya is a fashion stylist, blogger, poet, and performer. And I'm so happy that Parthivi introduced me to her, because the moment I just said hello to Teya, it was like, oh my God, there's like some kind of major resonance over here. So I'm so happy to have you as well, Teya. And and Varun Mathur, an artist, filmmaker, writer, and director who has worked on multiple national and international productions, including feature film, The Owner, who's joining us after, thank you so much, Varun, after a grueling 11-hour journey. I really appreciate that you made the time. But like I told you, you're looking beautiful, handsome as ever. So thank you so much for joining in.
How's it going?
Lovely, lovely, lovely. So we have 40 minutes to make this happen. Not enough time to do justice to this panel, but I'm going to start off with you, Neha. And if everybody else could be muted in the meanwhile, it would be wonderful. So Neha, I want to know, how does trauma show up in relationships? I think I mentioned to you that since 13 years, basically since I came back to India after my separation and all that drama in my life, I just cannot sleep next to anybody. Cannot. So, I mean, for me, that's how trauma has shown up. And I continue to work on myself. I mean, with my therapist, with my healer. I mean, my mother asks me, Neha, where all my money goes, and that's where it goes, right, on the work. So how does trauma show up in relationships for women?
Thank you, Nina. Hello, Varun, and hi, Teya. Lovely to be here with you today, and hello to everyone else who's watching. I really appreciate this question, Nina, and I just wanted to thank you for being like super authentic and just like sort of starting us off on a very vulnerable note, because a lot of what you're saying is quite common in the urban Indian cis female experience. Of course, I don't know if you are cis or you're not cis. You haven't said that. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I very much cis, bisexual, queer person in the urban Indian landscape. I brought up in a middle class background, worked my way up to a certain kind of like professional status. And I say all of that, those identities, to kind of like name that all of those also impact the way that trauma does show up in relationships, because trauma is social, it's socio-cultural, right? It's not really only the thing that happens between me and myself and me and my brain. It is things that are done to me, and then the way that my brain learns to respond to that trauma over time. So I know this is sounding a little bit like a lecture, but I hope it's not. Please forgive me if it is. I just want to like sort of like paint that framing to answer this question about how, because a lot of the times, Nana, people will expect, specifically women, men, of course, but specifically women, to sort of jump over events that happen in their life in the urban Indian context, right? Like, so 13, like until 13, you're told, no way, don't date, don't date, don't date. And then suddenly you're like asked to measure the length of your skirt, like depending on who your mom is, like either you're asked to be, very pretty, or you're asked to not be pretty at all. Then you like sort of like jump over those milestones about identity development. You become 20, and then suddenly everybody in your family is telling you like, come on, think of your future, and then suddenly it's sex, and then after sex it's children, and then it's supposed to be like dead, right? Like you're supposed to be done with your sexuality by the time you're like in your 30s, because clearly it has to be missionary position, and that's it, like for the rest of your life. So I think this is quite unrealistic and super pressurizing. And what's happening right now is that so many people are speaking up about not being happy or not being satisfied. And in that way, we are also in a cultural trauma sort of transition right now, as I write a lot in my work. Like we are transitioning as a society. So the definition of trauma is kind of changing. It's becoming a little more dilute. And we are seeing that a lot of our traumas, specifically as women, are related. So as you say that, you haven't been able to sleep next to someone for the last 13 years. One way for me to frame that would be, maybe that's a coping for your nervous system to feel safe and protected. And I don't know if I'm anyone to come in and say that that's not, like, let's fix that. Maybe your nervous system really feels secure in your own presence and doesn't feel secure in anybody else's presence, because it's built like that's its way to cope, in through trauma. So I hope I'm making sense, and I'll speak more as the questions progress.
No, you're making sense, but I just kind of wonder that, despite all the work that one does, is there how does trauma really go away, or do we just learn to cope with it? Because I'm doing the work, trust you me, that's I'm doing a lot of work, and I just wonder, and there's so many people I know, I don't know, I don't want to name anybody, but somebody I'm working with at this point, she mentioned to me, and she's all of 24, 25, and she said, Ninna, I feel the same way. I can't sleep next to anybody. And she's just had a couple of relationships. So I just wonder, is it something that just becomes a part of your life and you learn to cope with it? Because Neha, I sure as hell don't want my entire life going ahead to not be able to sleep next to a partner. Do you know what I'm saying? So do people have overcome trauma?
Yeah, so that's helpful, because you're saying you don't want that narrative for your life, but somebody else might want that narrative. And I just want to affirm that both of those are fine. It's not like there is one narrative that is better than the other narrative. If someone doesn't want to sleep next to someone for the rest of their life because they have experienced a certain kind of trauma, that is absolutely their choice. And I want to be fully affirming of that agency. But let's come to what you are saying. And I think what you're saying is also important. I'm hearing you say, like, you feel like incredibly anxious about the never-ending impact, right, that trauma can have in our lives, right? And please, please chime in, other folks, as well as I'm speaking. I hope that's okay. But Nina, I think that there is no end to trauma, and it's not that something I'm pulling out of my ass, really. Like, this is trauma research and trauma studies. There is no real end to it. But there's definitely a way to integrate it in a way that makes us feel safe and in control of the trauma. So if you're saying you haven't reached that point, you haven't reached that point where it is integrated within your system. Now, it could take you like the next 45 years, or it could take you 3 months. We don't know where the line is. And I like this. I like Atomic Habits, The Power of Atomic Habits. It's a new recent read that I'm recommending to folks. But have you heard of this, folks?
No, I haven't.
Oh, okay, okay. They describe the process of change, Nina, and they say that we expect sort of change to be linear. That if I put in 6 months of trauma therapy, I should get my results. If I put 1 year of holistic healing, then I should have the next year. I should face the results. And because it's such a complex like relationship between the trauma and myself, I talk a lot about woundology, and like you have to create a relationship with the wound, right? For me as an arts-based therapist, it's through art. I create relationship to my wound through art. I mean, if you see the art there in the background, that's all things that I've created from my own wound, from my own processing, and I work with clients to do that for them, so that the trauma isn't something they want to delete, but it's something they want to befriend, understand, integrate, and then hopefully build a relationship with. And then comes Atomic Habits, where they're talking about change being totally non-linear. You're going up a hill, you're going up a hill, you're going up a hill, and then suddenly one day you're at the top. You don't know when the top will come, but suddenly one day you're at the top because you can't see that far ahead, and that's okay. So a lot of trauma work is like that. It's saying, you know what? 13 years may not be that big a number that is sort of like in your head as like, oh my God, 13 years, like 14 years, now 15 years, like, like, what am I going to do about this?
Yeah.
To say 13 years. Okay, let me see where this takes me. And then it might take me to being comfortable with a new partner tomorrow. That's the trick.
So I'm hearing a lot of like, and it's reassuring, right? That it's okay. Choices are okay. Experiences are okay. Yeah, no, thank you, Neha. I mean, Tia, I'd like to come to you. I just love, the moment we connected and you were so candid about your story. And I think there's just such a massive power in story sharing. And I really think that people who are tuning in would benefit greatly from hearing about your experience. So if you could unmute yourself and talk about, what you went through with your previous relationship, would be wonderful.
Hi. I just want to say, like, before I even get started, Neha, I fully do agree. I think I had that realization very recently that it's just going to be like this. Like, it's going to be like this forever. And, like, specifically, like, talking about trauma, right? And, like, relationships. So, Nina, as you mentioned, when we first spoke, it almost, like, caught me off guard because it was such a honest question when you said that, oh, like, how has trauma, manifested itself in your life? And I thought about it for a second, and a lot of that comes from like relationships, but specifically, I think the core of it is like this need to be loved, right? And like not getting that love the way that you think you should be loved. And I say that to say that the last relationship I was in was it was severely like emotionally damaging, and it sucked because this was somebody who was a friend. I thought I'd known this person for a very long time, and there was this like one golden moment of like courtship where for like half a month it was perfect, it was great, and then it felt like the second I said yes, it was a whole nother person, and it was just, and I realized now that it was a lot of gaslighting, it was a lot of constant screaming and threats of violence, and it was just like it was a really isolating like existence to sort of live, right? To sort of like drop off the face of the earth because you feel like, oh, I finally found love, and I finally found love with a friend of mine, and we can make this work. Of course, we can make this work. Like he's smart, I'm smart, it can happen. And to just sort of see a person flip completely like that, and it wasn't a super long relationship either, mind you. Like this was in 2019, and I think I was in it for about like 3 months, but it felt like it took like 8 years off of my life because it broke off just as suddenly where like it was like I woke up from a stupor one day and I was like, wait, I'm allowing myself to be treated this badly and this can't be it. And I like getting out of that relationship was super hard, mostly because I was practically like living with him and he had like all my passwords, everything. And when I broke up with him, in response, I suppose he deleted like a huge entire part of like my creative archive, like images that I'd spent years working, some of my earliest writings, a lot of like my early work, So as Nina had mentioned in her introduction, I am somebody who's a poet, I'm a performer, I'm a fashion stylist. I like to express myself visually a lot. And I feel like this was somebody who knew how to hurt me, where like they thought it would hurt the most, and which was to sort of take away like quite literally the things I've worked on for years, like my creative impact on the world, right? Because that is something that's tangible, and to sort of delete all of that. And it's taken me quite a while to heal from it. I feel like I had to sort of move past it, because when it immediately happened, obviously, there's a lot of crisis mode that you go through, and you're like, go, we got to do this, we got to do this, we got to move, we got to move. How do we put as much distance between us and this person who has clearly shown that they are willing to be an aggressor, right? And so it was a lot of that. And even now, like talking about it, I had to get a little flustered, because I think a core part of me is just like, how did you not see this coming? Like, how could you let yourself stick around for even this long? Like, how could you be vulnerable with this person despite, like, from day one, from the jump, like being treated like extremely poorly for no reason? And so I think I deal with that, like I deal with my trauma in like a two-pronged approach, right? Like, one is obviously the actual like breaking of intimacy, and like having those trust issues that spring up, that I've been celibate for a rough 2 years now, which is wonderful. And it's mostly because I can't, like, just the idea of being like with another person just tends to just, I get very nervous about it, which is so weird, because I wasn't like this before this relationship. I was a very fun, friendly, flirty gal, and now I no longer am not that. So it's that, and then the other thing is the shame that I'm supposed to be this incredibly, like, educated, liberated, like, yes, girl, she's doing it for herself, like, I'm kind of a boss babe in like most aspects of my life. But then here came this like one dude and actively, like, sorry if I can swear, right? Like, actively wrecked my shit. And it feels terrible. And I think, I say all that to say that I think this is also part of like me being able to heal from that, is me being able to like get up and say, hi, I'm Teya, and I'm normally quite cool, but this one time I was a big idiot, a big dumb because I wanted love, and it kind of kicked me in the butt. And it's been a good 3 years, and I'm still sort of dealing with that, with all of that, and I think, I don't think the trauma ends, but I think we get better at sort of dealing with it and putting distance between ourselves and the person that we were when we were being hurt. So, yes.
Teya, thanks for sharing that. I'm a very open person. I believe in the power of sharing. I feel if you suppress things, you don't talk about them, they kind of fester. And that's something that I personally always found huge solace in. That when I talk about something that's bothered me, I feel so much better. I really appreciate your candor, Teya, and I totally related to what you spoke about. Like when we connected, 3 months can feel like 8 years. My previous relationship was 4 months, and it felt like 4 years. It was so intense, and So thanks for that, Teya. I'll come back to you.
The worst ones always are, right? Like, they're super intense, and it's just
yes. But thank you for sharing that, Teya. Varun, I'd like to come to you. When we met, we spoke about relationships and the way that we view life, and one of the things that you did talk about was that you've had like narc experiences, right? So I'd like to know, how has trauma shown up in your life?
Well, there's been, of course, life-threatening illness, which is already built as a base when I was an infant, but then subsequently in teenage years, and then subsequently 20s, there were very difficult patches with partners, with parents, and toxic systems that are built on industrialized hierarchies, essentially. And to be able to understand that you're not the center of the problem in that sense, after many years of going through all of that, and to understand that society in general is built on a narrative where trauma is normalized. Industrial society is continuously normalizing this kind of way of living, where people can be used as objects. People can be looked at. And I think Instagram is a really great example of that, which is that you've essentially normalized consumption of a human being for under 7 seconds. Right? Dating apps work like that. Right? I mean, we've all been on them at one point or the other. But my analysis of that is that this constant hankering for partnerships, for love, and all of that was seeded in a very different way through globalization. And these are very difficult narratives to untangle. But I think even though they bring a lot of, let's say, freedom, there's still a lot of complexity to how it's working and how the individual identity itself has been imperialized. And so, because now we are forced to look at even our own self-identity as a collection of things that we do, right? You're continuously attached to something that you have to be performative for society. There is not a silent space for you to just sit and be. And that kind of that kind of simplicity has been taken away from people, I think, to a large extent. And so then you have this kind of, whether the definitions that one might go by does not matter anymore, because now you're just looking for the perfect fit to the jigsaw piece, and it doesn't exist, right? And so people keep kind of banging their heads against each other, trying to think that, oh, I'm going to mold you in this way, I'm going to manifest my super partner, and all of that shit keeps going on. And people continuously are just subconsciously, I think, or largely unconsciously, creating their trauma for themselves, and as well as traumatizing other people, because the expectations have largely been manipulated to a very deep degree. And so if you start looking at it like this, you can also look at how the biological system of the body holds trauma. For example, there's really great research about the vagus nerve and the polyvagal theory, and how those things are unconscious triggers, and your cognitive map on how you attach yourself to certain ideologies and ideas rather than others, and why that happens. So your kind of equilibrium is completely shaken up, and you're continuously surrounded by fear, basically fear all the time. So in this kind of a system, it's very hard to find healing, because the system doesn't allow it. It doesn't, because a traumatized person is very easy to manipulate and to lead to certain paths, rather than allowing them complete freedom, for example, to understand what sexuality actually means. What does it actually mean apart from the physical act? What is it? Because I think, I started writing a film about this many years ago, and I should get back to it. But the idea that somebody who owns their own sexuality means the responsibility that of the emotion, the emotions, the mental scape, and the spiritual scape that comes along with it. And honestly, I've been in 20 years of a days where I've been on alcohol and one night stand, and all of that has happened, right? Like, and after that, I've come out of this little fog to understand what exactly happened. And what I was saying was that connection, we are not taught. There is no systems where you are taught how you can explore this. There are severe taboos around how people relate to each other. So you already have a preset template on how to judge someone. You don't even have to think of it consciously. It's already working, right? Like, it's already there. And so you're sifting through this whole world with this cognitive map and a very unexplored sexuality. And that, of course, is going to lead everybody to trauma. Like, there's no question about that. Because in my opinion, if people understood the unity of the four fields, so to speak, let's say the mental field, the emotional field, the spiritual field, and the sexual field, if people understood the composite and what it really means to have that kind of an exchange, then you have to be very responsible for yourself as well as for the other person. And suddenly you have like, if you can draw the map again of society, then you don't need policing. You don't need the kind of arbitrary, tyrannical kind of models of societal control that we see right now. And it's only because the unconscious and the subconscious are completely violent. They're not tamed, they're not controlled in that sense. Because there's no place where you can go and actually get initiated about this stuff, right? Like, there's no...
Varun, I have to be very honest. I mean, for me, my conversations with you on Instagram have sort of triggered so much in my head. I mean, not triggered is the wrong word. It's sort of like opened up a whole new dimension for me, because I never thought of this. I never thought of this capitalist sort of narrative that you're talking about, how the imperialistic lens. I never thought of all of that. So I really appreciate your point of view. But while I was listening to you talk, I was going all over the place, because there's so many points that you've sort of come up with. I mean, one of the things is that the whole I don't know if you follow this person called Freddie Birdie on social media. He's a content person. So he had this image up a couple of days ago about relationships today, and there was a rotating door. So literally gone, next, Next, I can delete you. I mean, in fact, I matched with somebody on Bumble last week, and then he said something. Oh, I just noticed in your bio you said you're not interested in anybody who's even kind of married and only separated. If you like, you can unmatch with me. And he was so nonchalant about it. And I said, ha ha. I said, goodness gracious. I said, do you realize how dispensable we human beings have become to each other? We might have spoken about some interesting stuff and connected, but you know what? I can do without you. And another thing that you spoke about, and that's what I want to come back to Neha with now, is pretty privilege, Varun. I don't know if you realize that you kind of made me think of that, because when I met you, I thought, oh my God, look at this hottie. He can possibly never have any problems in his life. And then you tell me you've had like narc abuse. I'm like, holy shit, such a cutie. How can it happen to him? But see, that's the mindset. That's my experience of life. That you know what? Oh, if you're good looking, shit can never happen. So Neha, I mean, this is a question that I wanted to ask you. That people believe that pretty privilege. Varun, could you mute yourself, please? There's a little echo there. So Neha, people believe that pretty privilege precludes you from trauma and promises you pleasure. So, what are your thoughts on this?
It's such a it's right to our violent subconscious, unconscious, like as Varun just pointed out, and as Teya was saying earlier, like being so. I love, Teya, that you're doing your makeup, and like I love that this moment that I've like suddenly focused on you, talking about the idea of makeup, prettiness, femininity, the performance of a certain kind of femininity, meaning that I'm somehow safe from rape culture, or I'm safe from mean culture, I'm safe from bullying culture. I mean, these are the things, not that Teya, you're saying any of this. These are the things that are projected upon a certain kind of like performance of pretty, right? And so like I think that's absolutely valid. I mean, that framing of pretty privilege, like precluding people from a certain kind of like harm in some way, is an absolutely valid stereotype that we do live with, and that we have to like navigate. Absolutely true. And I just want to bring in like a certain example here, which I think might land some of the things that have been said here. So I work with this incredible person who has experienced rape like 16 times. And I sort of like write about her narrative a lot. She's given me her consent. Identities and names changed, of course. If you're watching this, you know that I'm not like revealing your story. And like there's a lot of, and she's extremely conventionally beautiful. And people would just not believe this when she would go home to her partner and say that, her partner that she met after the serial abuser, she met this wonderfully like extremely like feminine seeming masculine man that she like connected with, and they've been in a relationship for the last like seven years. But in those 7 years, there's been all this processing of the 16 attempts of rape, right? Because each time she goes and like speaks about this to her partner goes, but really, I mean, yeah, I know, but like, don't you think that the guy was just like super attracted to you? Don't you think this? Don't you think that? Now, the guy's a really sweetie, like he's a sweetheart, but the violence in the subconscious that he's been brought up in is so big that it actually stops him from being intimate with his partner, because he says, well, if she's been raped these many times and she's been basically abused, what am I doing in her life? How can I penetrate? Like, I'm talking about intercourse now, very specifically like sexual intercourse, right? How can I penetrate? How can I have how can a part of my body be part of her body when she's gone through so much? So he's brought it back to his self-worth and its complete trauma dynamics in some ways, where he is now acting exactly like a trauma perpetrator, where he's deleting herself from what she needs as care. She needs his care. She needs his penetration, like I'm very bluntly put. She needs his love. She needs his masculinity in that particular sense. But he's taking it away from her because he's saying, I'm not worth your time. And I already know that. And she's been celibate for 7 years after being assaulted 16 times. But they have incredible love together. And so it's this like really, really rich example, right? Where a trauma survivor is saying, I am worth it, dude. Like, come, you are worth it. Let's do this together. Let's build a new narrative together. And so, Teya, to your earlier point, right, when you were saying that we have to sort of like somehow like just be okay with the fact that these are our life narratives, I fully agree with you. We do have to be okay. I just want to caution against the sometimes there's a disappointment or a dejection we feel, right? Like somehow that's equal to like, oh my God, this is my life. I just have to like tolerate it. So in some ways, my client that's what she's doing with the husband, and the husband is doing this to her. They're saying we just have to tolerate each other because clearly I'm not worth you, and the other one is going, I'm not worth you. And like that is, I think, where a lot of people are taking trauma healing work right now, where there's a lot of talk on Instagram, to your point, Varun. Also, like there's a lot of like talk, commodification of even trauma theory. But the the oppositional point of view becomes then, okay, then I just have to like, I guess I just have to live my life exactly how it is. I just have to like deal and tolerate, and then I don't know, there is no healing. It becomes very dejectionary. It becomes very dejected. And so there is a middle path, and that middle path to me is where we uncover these pretty privileged stereotypes. We really bring in the subconscious into a relationship. We are able to process the warts with each other. Because if you can't see each other's warts together, you're not going to have good sex. You're not going to want to be intimate. You're going to want to protect your warts. That's not sex. That's therapy and client. That's student and teacher, where we protect from our core in some ways. And so that's where that conversation, that question takes me. I'm sorry, did I open up more tangents, Nina?
No. I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, good Lord, 40 minutes is not enough, cannot do justice. Good Lord. But Teya, I mean, Neha was talking about trauma, right? And how it can show up and how different people deal with it. How have you rebuilt your life post what happened to you? Because huge parts of your being have been deleted. Your work, which is, such a huge part of your being. How have you rebuilt yourself? If you could unmute yourself, please.
So I think for me, it's actually like the way I've done it I think the first thing I had to get over was this idea that, okay, just because someone like took away something that meant a lot to me doesn't mean that they've not taken away my ability to do it, right? Like I had to remind myself that like my archive of images was not me. It was something I did. And yeah, it would have been nice to like look back at those memories, but it doesn't take away my ability to do exactly that, probably better, because I have grown since I was, whatever ages I was when those archives were happening. And when all that early work, if it's gone, it's gone. It doesn't take away the experiences I had doing it, the value it added to my life and my repertoire as a creative. And I think just starting with that and then just sort of picking up and moving right along, it took me a while to be able to write poetry again, because it felt really hard to do that and to like not have the ability to like go back and like remind myself, oh, that was a really good piece that I wrote. Because sometimes I think at least for me as a creative person, I like to have those anchors to look back at and be like, yeah, I did do that. That was kind of cool, and therefore I can like take that energy and push forward with it. So I just realized I had to like build new anchors, and I think weirdly enough, right after like all of that happened, I started immediately performing with a nightlife troupe. I the singer booked to perform poetry at Magnetic Fields. I've gone and like danced for like 1,000 people, and it's been insane, and it's allowed me to actually sort of like give up on like whatever older notions I had and to sort of really just reinvent myself, right? So I just picked up and just started.
Oh, wow.
So I think
that is so powerful, Teya.
thank you. I mean, and then like a pandemic happened, and it's been a lot about like just constantly picking the pieces up, and I think a friend of mine once told me that like being in any kind of like depressive spiral or like any kind of like trauma response, it's a lot like being down in like a cave, like in the dark, but if you sort of like reach your hand out, you'll find that there are so many people around you right down there in the darkness with you, and they can always like help you get out. And I think being able to lean on my friends, being able to lean on like, because I do have a lot of unshakable faith in myself, and I think one has to have that. Absolutely has to have that. And I just said, yeah, cool, I will restart my Instagram, I will restart doing shoots, I will branch out more, I'll take more risks now, I'll do weird things, I guess. It's been pretty cool.
Lovely. Thank you for sharing that, Teya. We have like 7 minutes to go, and there are two questions that I want to ask. Varun, I want to ask you about how do you own pleasure and trauma in your relationships. And then after that, Neha, I have to ask you about dating apps. So let's be mindful of the time. We have 7 minutes and we have to do justice to these 7 minutes. So Varun, you go, please. In the dark.
Okay.
Teya, you were talking about the cave. There the man is in the cave. Oops, can't hear you, Varun. Can't hear Varun. Oh no.
I think
We've lost you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you
Can you
now.
hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. All right. So what I was saying, I think there's a separation between what my personal creative endeavor might be and what I am collaborating with emotionally and mentally with a partner. And that kind of, it's a third entity that's born. You're giving birth to a third entity, that's the two of you. Whether it's one day or 5 years or 50 years, that's, I think that has to be kept in mind about, because people tend to try and preserve themselves in a relationship, and that's kind of, it's based on insecurity and fear rather than collaborative.
Varun can't hear you well. Varun unfortunately can't hear you. I'm going to have to move on to name.
I think that is something that leads eventually to.
Yeah, Varun can't hear you. I'm going to move on to Neha because I can't hear you. It's kind of breaking. Yeah. How unfortunate, we wanted the caveman's story. But anyway, Neha, so coming to you, okay, this is a really important question. Teya and I personally also want to know this, right? So what are your thoughts on dating apps? And what should one keep in mind when embarking on a swipe fest? Because I have to be honest, and this is like ridiculous. I'm embarrassed, but this is who I am, right? The moment I go onto a dating app and I match, the Varmala comes out in my head. Okay. So what should one be mindful of? Now I'm a little less dramatic. I'm kind of a little, I'm being practical, so to speak, doesn't come to me as first nature. But what should one keep in mind when you embark on a swipe fest?
My therapist always told me, and she's this lovely older, like I love the elder energy, right? And she's this elder person who's like, this should be fun for you. She's like, sexuality should be fun, dating should be fun. And I think for a long time, dating apps were giving us the idea, selling us the idea of fun, but they were not really actually meeting the promise that it's actually going to be fun. Because somewhere it started becoming a lot of work. So I remember, like, historically, when there was only OkCupid and there was Shadi.com in India, there were two very separate ways to do this. Okay, Shadi.com was permanent relationship. OkCupid was for literally like the weirdos. And I was one of the weirdos on it, like really trying to meet like new friends. I'm very pro technology, and I was just like, let me see where this takes me, right? And years went by, and then it became this Bumble, Hinge, Tinder. I'm not attacking any of these brands. I'm saying there are lots and lots of options that are now in the market. So I feel like it is one of the parts of living in a traumatized society is that we have to accept that this is how people meet today. People are getting married off of Tinder. People are getting married off of Bumble. It is just the reality. This is how people are meeting today. I've been telling a lot of folks who are very interested in meeting people to say that set timers for yourself. Like, be okay that you're going to have an on and off relationship with a dating app. You're not going to be always on it, like looking at a career, like trying to do like interviews, but you're also not always going to be off it. The moment you're going to feel a little bit lonely, a little bit maybe drunk, a little bit, I don't know, there are many reasons to get on it. Allow yourself that flexibility to have an on and off relationship. Sorry, I think there's an echo. But if there isn't, if you're not feeling like fun, so this Varmala thing that is coming up for you, if it were, now I'm speaking just for myself, if it were coming up for me, I would not be dating. I would be just allowing myself to relax my own nervous system, because honestly, my nervous system is feeling activated when that person is like already showing interest in me, and I'm thinking, whoa, I'm like catastrophizing, right? I'm escalating it really quickly. So I would give myself a break because I'm wondering, why have I reached this point? But there are other people I know who allow the Varmala thing to happen. They allow the catastrophe, and then they breathe, and then they like continue to talk to the person, and they really very, very strategically block people and unblock people. I think that's just a tool of the technology that has to be used, instead of feeling like this is I'm losing out on every opportunity. Use the tool for you. And like sort of like a business, right? Like you're not going to give your time and energy to every opportunity that comes your way. So, but for that, you need to know yourself. You need to know why I'm escalating, why I'm not escalating. And if that's not fun, then don't do it. Like wait until you feel like you want to have some fun, and then you'll feel a little bit lighter, is what I think.
You know what? Actually, this time round, for the first time, I mean, my entire life, my friends have told me, "Now, oh God, you're so hectic. You want to make it serious so quickly." This is the first time I'm taking nothing seriously. So, I mean, I'm proud of myself. I've gotten to this point, but 40 minutes, no justice. But it's been so wonderful having the three of you, and really appreciate you taking the time. But in the interest of time, we're going to have to sign out of this panel. And thank you so much for joining, Neha, Teya, and Varun. It was really fun talking to you guys.